Thank you so much, David. I think as we start to talk about the housing market forecast for 2023, the best place to start is where have we been so far this year in 2022? And I truly think that this housing market has been defined by two key things, inflation and rapidly rising mortgage rates. Now, we're starting to see signs of inflation easing, and we know that the Federal Reserve is still making moves to lower inflation, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet. But where that lands is really going to impact what happens with the housing market next year. And I think the housing market in 2023 is going to be defined by can the Fed bring inflation down and keep it there? And will we see stability in the market, especially around mortgage rates? So where I want to begin today is talking about mortgage rates, home sales, prices, how all of these factors are starting to come together for 2023 and what the experts are saying. And I think we can actually begin with a quote that we shared with you earlier this year, in about June of this year, from Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve. And I think this really sets the stage for what the Fed was out to do this year. So it says, I'd say if you are a home buyer, somebody or a young person looking to buy a home, you need a bit of a reset. We need to get back to a place where supply and demand are back together and where inflation is down low again and mortgage rates are low again. So in June, this is exactly what the Fed was saying. We need a bit of a reset. We need to slow the economy. We need to get the housing market back into a place where it's a little bit more balanced. So, all of that is driven by inflation. So we've watched the Federal Reserve make moves to try to lower inflation this year. That work is still in progress, and we are certainly not out of the woods yet, but it's definitely had an impact on mortgage rates, on buyer activity, on inventory, on prices. It's really put the market back into that reset position, and there's much more to come in that space. So if that's really what started to define 2022, let's talk about where 2023 is headed and what the experts are saying. So I want to begin with mortgage rates. And I think we can all agree, just as I just mentioned, 2022 defined by rising mortgage rates. And this is a look at the Freddie Mac 30-year fix going all the way back to January of this year. If you follow along with us, you've definitely seen this before. And the big takeaway is that rapid rise. This has never happened before in a calendar year. Mortgage rates more than doubled this year. And we've never seen that before. And so it's less about the number. It's less about the fact that, a little over a month ago that mortgage rates ticked up over 7%. It's really more about that rapid rise that has caused uncertainty, confusion, people in the market just saying, hey, I'm not ready to jump in. And that has had an impact on the balance of the housing market. It has slowed buyer demand. It has slowed the pace of sales. And that's really what we've been looking at this year. So as we start to think about what's ahead for next year, mortgage rates are really hard to project. It's all about inflation. We're going to continue to watch inflation. And as inflation is high, mortgage rates tend to be high. But as we're starting to see signs of that potentially turning, we want to know where mortgage rates are going to go. And so what the experts are saying right now, if you look at Freddie, Fannie, MBA, and NARM, we average those together roughly somewhere between 6 and 6.5% next year. So starting out about where we are right now, possibly ticking down if inflation starts to come down too. And, the reality of it is it's less about the number. I said that a moment ago. And it's more about the market is looking for stability, looking for mortgage rates to kind of level out. Now, whether that's somewhere between 5.5 or 6.5%, the goal is for mortgage rates to stabilize. And we certainly aren't talking about the record lows that we saw over the past 2 years, but we shouldn't be talking about rapid acceleration either. So as inflation starts to turn, that's what we are going to be looking for to see what happens with mortgage rates. And this is, realistically what experts are saying right now. And I think this quote from Greg McBride at Bankrate really says it well. It says, mortgage rates could pull back meaningfully next year if inflation pressures ease. It's all about inflation. That's what we've been talking about this year. We're going to continue talking about it next year. The Federal Reserve is meeting again later this month. And if they continue to hike federal funds rates up as aggressively as they have been, that's going to have a different impact on mortgage rates. So the reality of it is they may go up before they come back down. It's really not a matter of if mortgage rates will come back down. It's really more of when. And that's what we're going to be watching in response to inflation. Now, as we've seen inflation rise this year and as we've seen mortgage rates tick up, that's impacted home sales. So let's talk about what home sales look like so far this year, and let's talk about the projections for next year. So total home sales for this year, you can see that green bar right there. This is a combination of existing homes and new construction, projected to end the year around 5.8 million home sales. Now, coming off of last year, that feels like a major slowdown. We sold roughly 6.9 million homes last year. That was significantly higher than where we are right now. And if you look back in time, that's what you can see on this graph. This goes all the way back to 1999. We haven't seen 5.8 million home sales in about 10 years or so. So this is going to feel like a slowdown. You're probably already feeling some of that right now. And if you've been in the business for the last 5 to 10 years, you haven't seen a year like this recently. And so, we use that analogy all the time of last year felt like you were flying down the highway at 90 miles an hour. Things were moving really fast and you came around the bend and saw all those flashing lights and you kind of hit the brakes real hard, and while you were still moving forward, it felt a lot slower. So coming off that high of 2020 and 2021, this year feels a little bit slower. And if this feels slow, let me share with you what next year is projected to look like. 5.1 million home sales. Now, that's going to feel even slower. However, I want to park here for a second, talk about this projection for next year that the experts are saying. Now, 5.1 million home sales, less than this year, definitely less than last year. But here's the thing, experts tend to reproject throughout the year. And right now they're making projections for next year, and it's based on a lot of different things. And right now we're in a place where inflation is high, mortgage rates are high. We're still seeing buyer demand, but it's not as high as it was. We have more inventory on the market, but we're not seeing a ton of new listings. We're seeing new construction slowing a bit. And so projections for next year are clearly lower. Now, I think as we start to see that nod towards the Fed getting inflation under control, mortgage rates potentially coming down in that moment in time, as we start to see that, I anticipate that this number, this 5.1 million home sales, will start to tick up throughout next year. It's really not a matter of if, it's more about when we start to see that activity really kick back in. So we're going to be continuing to watch this forecast as we go forward and continue to bring you that information on how are experts reprojecting throughout the year, because we do see that quite a bit. And if we look ahead at how some of the experts are breaking down total home sales for next year in millions, anywhere from about 4.5 to 5.5 million homes. We like to put that into context to average them all together and to really look at this and say, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, maybe not the high end, maybe not the low end, but the average right now is showing about 5.1, and we're going to continue to watch that number. And so, the question becomes what's going to tick back up? What's going to cause more transactions? What's going to kind of reinvigorate that number next year? And I think this quote from Lawrence Yun really says that well. It says, the upcoming months should see a return of buyers as mortgage rates appear to have already peaked and have been coming down since mid-November. So as we start to see inflation hopefully come under control, mortgage rates respond, we are going to see more buyer activity. Buyers are looking for stability and predictability in the market. And as that starts to unfold, we've got a bumpy road ahead. Hear me out on that. As that starts to unfold, we will see more buyers come back to the market, and that should start to increase the pace of sales as well. And, it says that mortgage rates have already potentially peaked. We hope that that is right. We are going to continue to watch that because that's a really big part of the cascade that we've seen happening in the market this year. Now, as we start to talk about, next year, home prices are the big thing on everybody's mind as well. And I want to walk through what the experts are saying about home price forecasts for 2023. And I think this graph really kind of breaks down several of those leading experts. And really, the latest forecasts we have are showing that some experts are saying home prices to appreciate a little bit next year. Some experts are saying home prices to come down a little bit next year. This is year over year appreciation for 2023. Now, again, context is key. We bring all of these together, we average them all out. And if you look across the board, roughly neutral or flat home price appreciation next year. That's what happens when we kind of pull all these together and take a look at the grander picture. The clarity and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So that's where the average really comes from. And we're coming off a point in time earlier this year where we had 20% year over year home price appreciation. We're certainly not looking at that going forward, but we're also not looking at massive declines. No one is calling for, 10, 20% home price depreciation. So this is all about supply and demand. The more buyers we have in the market, the more home prices will rise. That balance of more buyers than homes available, that tends to put upward pressure on home prices. And right now we're sitting at about 10 to 11% year over year home price appreciation. Now we've also been looking at month over month home prices. And as we've seen a little bit of month over month declines, here's what we're also seeing right now is that decline is getting a little bit smaller. So as we look into next year, we're really looking at flat or neutral home price appreciation. It's going to be different market by market. We have some markets, especially out on the West Coast, that were much more overheated, and they're going to see more movement in home prices than some other markets. But we're going to continue to bring, what's happening with supply, demand, all of the things that impact home prices for 2023. And I think this quote from Mark Fleming really kind of talks about the demand that we're looking for. And it says, the housing market, once adjusted to the new normal of higher mortgage rates, will benefit from continued strong demographic-driven demand relative to an overall long-run shortage of supply. We still have more buyers than sellers in most markets. We still have this massive demand from millennials aging into the home buying age, and all of those factors are going to continue to put upward pressure on home prices. And again, this really nods toward looking for that stability. Once the housing market has adjusted to the new normal, adjusted to mortgage rates potentially settling into a more stable range, we're going to see more buyers come back into the market. And that's going to really tip, what we're feeling right now for 2023. And I want to end on this quote from Doug Duncan from Fannie Mae, because I think this really says it well. It says, from our perspective, the good news is that demographics remain favorable for housing. So, that demand that we see, still a demand for people to buy homes. So the sector appears well positioned to help lead the economy out of what we expect will be a brief recession. So I started at the beginning talking about how this is all about inflation. The more we start to hear inflation coming under control, inflation coming down, that sparks that conversation about a potential recession. As we talk about a recession, we never want to wish a recession upon anyone, but more and more likely that we will see that if inflation starts to come down. And the question becomes, what does that mean for the housing market if we do see a brief recession? History tells us mortgage rates come down. What happens as inflation lowers and mortgage rates come down? We will see more buyers come back into the market. Definitely buyers have more options to choose from now. They're looking for stability. As we start to see all of that unfold, we're going to see 2023 respond in that way. So what's the overall takeaway? It's all about inflation. The market is looking for stability in 2023. We're looking for mortgage rates to kind of stabilize and become more predictable. We're watching the economic drivers around us, and we're still seeing demographic demand that is going to drive the housing market forward. So as we wrap up, I want to remind you that we now have our winter buyer and seller guides available. These are great resources for bringing to open houses, to sending to your clients digitally. So they have everything that they need with the most hyper relevant information so they can make powerful and confident decisions when it comes to buying and selling a home. And that certainly makes you the expert if you can put these guides in their hands. So you can head over to the member area, downloads, they're personalized for you. Really, really great resources that I encourage you to use as you go into 2023. And of course, we will see you back here again next year.